All right, welcome into Surviving Paradise, the podcast that takes a sometimes serious, oftentimes humorous look at the claim by Jehovah's Witnesses that they are living in a modern day spiritual paradise. I'm your host here, Stacy Bauman, former elder, ministerial servant, and a kid raised as a Jehovah's Witness in the 70s and 80s. Warning, we try to have a little fun here. We try to heal. Each episode has sarcasm, humor, and my own brand of observation. Please note, never meant to offend. And as you can tell, I'm dealing with another bad cold. So here I am after a week of technology issues. We are back. Still not certain they're fixed, but hopefully it'll allow us to get an episode in and take a walk through paradise. And in my time away, dealing with tech issues, I decided I wanted to take a walk down memory lane. Yes, I realize some of this has been mentioned on this show before over the last 2 years, but I was inspired by a conversation I had with someone regarding Generation X versus Generation Z. And when you grow up in a cult, you can't get away from the impact it had on you during the most important years of your life. Even as a teenage Jehovah's Witness was being hammered with reminders that the world was going to end any second, we still had to tie our shoes, I guess get out of bed first, and navigate being a teenager as we ran around daily in the world with Satan and his demons. Even then, a young Jehovah's Witness knew that Satan was showing up everywhere. You remember this one from 1 John 5:19 of the New World Translation. J-Dub kids constantly heard, quote, "We know that we originate with God, but the whole world is lying in the power of the wicked one," end quote. Yep, an endless reminder. And if the Bible itself wasn't enough to convince you as you nodded off at meetings, the governing body at that time, mystery men we had never seen, no one could identify, they saw fit to remind us of how dangerous our entire lives were. From the standard Bible study aid most of my generation based their young baptism on, the You Can Live Forever in Paradise on Earth blood red book, pages 208 and 209, we were told, quote, Jesus called Satan the ruler of this world. And the Apostle John said that the whole world is lying in the power of the wicked one. Satan's world is this organized human society that exists apart from or outside of God's visible organization. Satan's world, his organized human society, is made up of various closely connected parts, end quote. Ooh, we got the message in the 80s. We may have been thrilled to watch Indiana Jones and the Lost Ark. By the way, sacrilegious in its own right. Don't they know that Jehovah hid the Ark? Never mind. But when it came to Indy fighting bad guys, well, he had nothing on those of us that were teenagers in the 1980s. Although it's worth mentioning that Steven Spielberg may have been familiar with Jehovah's Witnesses, because if you remember the movie at the end, when all the demons come flying out of the ark, Indy tells Marion to close her eyes and don't look at the demons. You remember, just like our parents did when horror movie trailers came on TV. Were we the only ones? Remember that, my fellow Gen Xers? You remember, Mom, no, turn the channel. Don't look at Friday the 13th commercials. Cover your eyes. The demons may think you're interested and visit us tonight. And hey, it was real. You younger generations, this was before remote control. So watching your mother lunge at the television to manually turn the channels before the demons got inside the house, it's a core memory for some of us. But hey, see a past episode on demons if you're interested. It's a fun one. But as usual, I digress. The generation of teenagers in the 1980s, and yes, Yes, I am biased. To me, was a very unique generation. While we were promised to be the generation that witnessed Armageddon in all its glory and just step over dead bodies on our way to a plant based diet and a pet giraffe, well, look, folks, it's 2025 and Armageddon never came. We had no clue at the time that Jesus was letting the governing body teach us wrong things. Yeah, he just let them teach us the wrong thing for decades. And for Jesus to take until the late 1990s to reveal the generations somehow overlap, he forgot. It happens. Look, my generation in my mind is unique. We were force-fed this at every meeting, every convention, in every publication, and we based our entire lives on this stuff. From the Watchtower of May 1st, 1985, page 4, notice the year, we're told, quote, thus, judgment would be executed sometime during the lifespan of people seeing the first evidence of the time period foretold by Jesus. Thus, before the 1914 generation completely dies out, God's judgment must be executed. End quote. Well, listen, update. I've got an update. You see, Jesus apparently was stringing my generation along for a while, just kind of stringing us along. Look, maybe he forgot, as I mentioned, even in billions of pages of publications, in every talk, at every meeting, it slipped his mind to teach accurately, to teach accurate things until November 1995, long after we Gen Xers had gotten married, had kids, and were working menial jobs to survive. It was quite an oversight by the great teacher, but here we are. I often fear that younger generations of Jehovah's Witnesses, some of whom I now see on TikTok, good for them, won't understand the life-altering impact all of this had on my generation. So I repeat myself a lot. Yep. So future generations have a reference point. So there we were. Teenagers, in the full sense of the word. It was the 1980s. Satan and the demons were sent to our room, the earth, by Jesus himself. And they were here every day. They were everywhere. We believed we associated more with Satan than with Jesus himself in those days. Isn't that weird? They were here, he was there, and no one could figure out why a loving king would do that. But it was all okay. He was going to usher us into a paradise any second. We would never get gray hair. Boys, us guys were dreaming about all the hot Jewish girls that we saw depicted in the Watchtower magazine that we just knew would be resurrected. And the girls were looking forward to serving men in perfect subjection for the rest of eternity, and at least those guys would have beards. But little did we know. We may not be in paradise, but at least Jehovah's Witness sisters in 2025 now get to see us in those beards, and continue to be in imperfect subjection to the guys. It's a good time. I truly believe my generation of teenagers navigated Satan's world much differently than modern generations of Jehovah's Witness teens. And maybe I'm just sensitive to the perceived differences because I'm an old guy now. But frankly, I feel like Satan and the end of the world felt more real to us younger generations, to my kids. We rarely, and I mean rarely, question the organization or authority, at least outwardly, not like young people do today. And yeah, a lot of us had to do, a lot of this, I should say, had to do with the fact that we didn't even know who the governing body were. I never met a governing body member until Guy Pearce in my 20s. And he wasn't yet at that time chosen by Jesus to be on the governing body. I was eating Wendy's French fries with him on our coffee break when he was our circuit overseer. He loved, by the way, little tidbit, he loved NFL football and never would have guessed he would be judging me soon from heaven. There wasn't a chance I thought that. But I'll tell you what, Guy Pearce loved coffee breaks. I was stunned when we made one call in field service and he asked us to go on a break. I'll never forget it. It was his thing. It was very inspiring, by the way. Truthfully, I love this younger generation of Jehovah's Witnesses or JW wannabes because they're not afraid to openly ask questions, to push back a little bit. And I got to tell you, and maybe it was my own experience, we just didn't do that very much, if at all, during the 80s. There was so much fear in the air, fear of being marked as bad association or disfellowshipped. Oh, and back then, it was so cool. It was everything to have privileges in the congregation, like running the microphones. Ooh, you have arrived. You didn't want to screw that up by asking a common sense question of an elder or a circuit overseer. Running those microphones back in the day, by the way, gave you status. It also allowed you to flirt with cute sisters during the meeting. So when the Watchtower study was covering what a righteous man Lot was, even though you knew he was a deeply sick guy that got involved with his own daughters, you just smiled and got that microphone into Sister So-and-so's hand because while she was answering, you and her daughter could smile at each other. And she was eyeing you as husband material on both of your 18th birthdays. Welcome to the 80s. And I'll tell you, it was sick stuff to look back on. And it's sick, but I'm also oddly very fond of it. What can I say? So in some ways, it's important to me to share some of the landmark teachings that shaped our lives as Jehovah's Witnesses in the 80s, as well as the Jehovah's Witness cultural phenomenon that molded so much of what many of us, even as we're older now, still deal with today because it's in our psyche. I get it for younger people listening, but frankly, I feel like Satan's world was so much more fun back then. I know. No one had a clue what an internet was. There was no social media. We didn't even have email. We could sit for hours with a Rubik's Cube. You thought a girl was cute? You had to write her a note. You had to handwrite it. And eventually we were putting together music mixtapes to proclaim our love for her. The sisters had to fight following worldly trends by having big hair or wearing leg warmers and an oversized sweatshirt that fell off one of their shoulders. Ooh, making it impossible for us JW teenage guys to concentrate in meetings. I mean, bare shoulder and stuff. For those who don't know what those are, go watch Flashdance on your favorite streaming service. You'll get it. But even that didn't last long because Satan and the demons eventually sent us Madonna. And then bare shoulders didn't quite have the impact that Madonna did, rolling around in lingerie, singing about losing her virginity. That got our attention. Satan was on a roll. While worldly teens say, yes, that in itself is a term of Jehovah's Witness teenhood, that term was one of the most common inside the cult back in those days. Worldly people, worldly teens. But while worldly teens were locking up a prom date, Jehovah's Witness teens were navigating something else entirely. Consider what the 1980s teenager had for study material from Jesus' organization. It's a classic, and it was one of a kind, actually released earlier. It was called Your Youth, Getting the Best Out of It. It too was blood red and was released in 1976. This is what got me through puberty, folks. This publication, inspired from the throne of Christ, had advice for teens in the 1980s. Advice such as this. on sensitive subjects such as masturbation. From the Your Youth Getting the Best Out of It, pages 35 and 42, the faithful slave taught us this, quote, "The real question then is how much physical harm could result from masturbation, but whether spiritual harm results. To help to avoid or reduce sexual tension, you may find it helpful to sleep on your side rather than on your back or face down. Another thing that may be helpful is to see that your clothing does not unnecessarily cause friction with the sexual organs. In fact, masturbation can lead into homosexuality. Contrary to what many persons think, homosexuals are not born that way, but their homosexual behavior is learned." End quote. Jesus was on a roll. The governing body was teaching us such words of wisdom. And I'm here to tell you, if you think much has changed, think again. If you've had the opportunity to see the leaked Bethel training videos for brothers, it was a few years ago, you'll realize that nothing has changed. They had a diatribe on how teenage or young men hump pillows. Toni Morris made reference to our, quote, excitement for tight pants. But forget about it. We teenage boys of the 1980s were the OGs. We're going to own it. We learned about our strong desire to make love to a pillow back in the 1980s. And look, full confession, I was in love with Susanna Hoff of the Bangles. Still am, frankly, and I've met her, but that's a story for another day. But back in the day, I had to worry about pillows looking good. I mean, was it an option? Pillows were an option. And how about it, the inspired word that touching oneself could make you gay? See, the 1980s were indeed special times. Even if pillows still pose a danger to young men today, no silky pillowcases, by the way, Satan, he's still here, and he knows how to even make a pillow tempting. This is the kind of wisdom teenage people in the 80s were growing up on, and it's why I think we're unique. They've backed a little bit away from masturbation turning you gay, but there it is, still in print, and available on the Watchtower Library as spiritual food at the proper time. But as time went on the historical timeline of God's organization, my generation of teenage Jehovah's Witnesses were well into our 20s before Jesus decided to update this council with a new book in 1989, the illustrious Questions Young People Ask, Answers That Work. I can confirm there was no pillows on the cover of this book. But by then I was a young ministerial servant, and I was pissed when we got this book. When I dove into this book and found that the dangers of pillows and touching oneself turns you gay were gone. At this point, I was married at that time, and hot damn, how many hot pillows did my generation miss out on? By the way, I still loved Susanna Hoffs, but well, anyway, let's move on. I would be remiss without mentioning one of the most damaging, if not the most damaging publication of my teenage years. And I'm really curious to know if younger generations of Jehovah's Witnesses are even familiar with this one. But I'm going to ask, who remembers? Ah, yes, the School and Jehovah's Witnesses brochure. It was released during the summer conventions in 1983. Say what you will, but this thing was a haymaker for my generation. Updated versions of this have never carried the weight that the original did. And I'm here to tell you in all seriousness, this brochure, School and Jehovah's Witnesses, it destroyed childhoods. And I am not being dramatic. This thing laid waste to my generation. At this point, I had just started high school. But it stripped us of any and all fun that the old youth book from the late 70s hadn't already done. It made every effort to turn a kid raised as a Jehovah's Witness into a standalone freak at school. It wasn't a passive publication. It seriously ruined Gen X childhoods. The amount of lost potential and experiences and time from this brochure is an understatement. And Jehovah's Witness parents made massive decisions around this piece of shit. And that's what it was. I said it. And the governing body pushed placing this with our teachers almost weekly. There was service meeting parts. Take this to your kids' teachers. Take this to high school. You high school kids, give speeches in front of the class. School and Jehovah's Witnesses. And I'll tell you, for those that do remember this thing, the cover alone probably makes my generation feel sick to their stomach. If you're too young to remember this abomination, allow me for a few reminders of what this did to our souls. Our thinking in the 80s was being molded by this organization, and at least at that age and with a lack of life experience, we didn't even realize it. And as for me, I was a kid of a single mother. I barely obeyed anything inside Jehovah's Witnesses during high school. I was that guy. I was the congregation black sheep. I played football, I ran track, I got good grades, I dated worldly girls, and I listened to hair metal. I love me some 80s hair metal. I was a bad boy. That's not even a term anymore, right? But in the organization, the congregation, and the emotions and the looks, I still remember them. I was that guy. And I was reminded of this at meetings. And most of it came during that time period for my generation from the School and Jehovah's Witnesses brochure. For example, from the brochure on page 23, our parents and us as kids were told this, quote, "Witness parents feel that schools often overemphasize sports. Participation in organized sports, we believe, would expose witness youths to unwholesome associations. Participation in organized sports, we believe, would expose witness youths to unwholesome associations." Just wanted to repeat that. "We also feel that the competitive spirit in modern sports, the winning isn't everything, it's the only thing ideology, has harmful effects," end quote. They ripped off Nike, one of their best phrases. It isn't everything, it's the only thing. Sports. Well, if they thought organized sports were fine before, that was over. You notice the we believe, we believe, we believe. I can't even emphasize how frowned upon playing sports was back in the 1980s. It was completely frowned upon. Generations of Jehovah's Witness kids weren't allowed to play sports, were pursued by coaches and told no. I know guys that lost scholarships. Not kidding. And it's why this is so much more of a dig, of a thorn in our side, my generation, and makes it that much funnier when we see Serena Williams doing her thing today. Or in my case, and for those who know me, they'll likely know who I'm talking about, Jehovah's Witness men from my generation that actually played in the NFL that now brag about it on their TikTok. Yeah, they're Jehovah's Witnesses, they're elders, but they're bragging about their football career. Even as you go to the website right now and you find the experience of Jason Worlds, a linebacker for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he's talking about what it meant to give up football. Is he aware that one of the elders is on TikTok talking all about his football career because he disobeyed the school brochure? The hypocrisy is insane. And in full disclosure, this causes emotions for my generation, for those of us that obeyed. When we see these guys today that are elders and giving circuit assembly parts, and they disobeyed and went and played professional sports. It's hilarious. This brochure killed sports for my generation. And I realize that that's not going to probably resonate with most of the crowd, but for those that were athletic and wanted to do that, it was a very big deal. And I disobeyed it. I disobeyed it too. They played in high school, but became a serious Jehovah's Witness upon graduation. That's what you see in the organization today. And by the way, guilty as charged. I did the same thing. I was a nobody high school athlete. Nobody. But I did it. And then I got serious about the organization after I graduated. That's how we pulled it off back in the 80s. But they weren't just robbing us of sports. You couldn't even be a cute girl who was a cheerleader, who was even cheering for sports. From the same brochure that wrecked lives, School and Jehovah's Witnesses, page 23, the faithful slave told my teenage generation this, quote, under the headline, Cheerleader and Homecoming Queen, at athletic events, it is the responsibility of cheerleaders to orchestrate the crowd in frenzied cheering for a school. Oh, no. They also encourage the people into hero worship and lead them in standing for the school song. Jehovah's Witnesses consider it inappropriate to do this. Similarly, we feel that for a witness youth to serve as a homecoming or beauty queen would be in violation of Bible principles that show the impropriety of glorifying humans. End quote. So if you're keeping score at home, a Jehovah's Witness teen in the 1980s believed that Jesus had sent Satan down here to earth to live with us. Without ever questioning that decision, a teenage girl was told that she was being, like Satan by glorifying herself while at a high school football game or being recognized as a great person by her classmates. You can't make this stuff up. I laugh at this now, but let's call it what it really is. It's sick. It's sick. When not giving in to our lust for a pillow, it was insinuated that we wanted to be like Satan himself, just because some cute girl was voted the homecoming queen. You're like Satan. That was the message from the organization in the 80s. And while now it still maybe has a twinge of discomfort for a woman or a guy who missed out on sports or being a cheerleader, back then, folks, it was devastating. It was devastating to a 15, 16, 17-year-old. And as you can see, this brochure and why it was so awful for us, this brochure still pisses me off. Our parents bought into all of it. Every time back in the 80s, Toni Basil came on MTV in her cheerleader uniform singing, "Oh, Mickey, you're so fine, you blow my mind, hey, Mickey," I would frown and think, oh my, she doesn't seem to be singing about herself. Who's Mickey? Where did I learn that? In the School and Jehovah's Witness brochure. To be a cheerleader meant you were arrogant and like Satan. It was absurd then. It's even worse now. But needless to say, and why I bring this up and why it was on my mind this week, this was a real dynamic for a young person in the 80s. And can you imagine the amount of disappointed kids? By the way, On all things sports, cheerleading, homecoming queens, and everything else, I just want to issue a quick reminder to Jehovah's Witnesses. This is counsel from the faithful and discreet slave. So you might want to skip this year's Super Bowl party hosted by your favorite JW elder. You see, no one cheers at these. No one's rooting for a team. And above all, no one drinks any alcohol. Right? And if you believe any of that, I have the date for Armageddon for you. Stay tuned till the end. Yes, that's a joke. The 80s were incredibly stifling and suffocating to teenagers. Not that they aren't now inside Jehovah's Witnesses, but as you can see from the literature and the stuff that our parents jammed down our throat, it devastated lives. People were hurt. People missed out on things. But you can't talk about all things 1980s JW teenage life without sharing just how important, well, music and dancing were to us. I'm assuming that it still is for today's JW teenagers. I don't truthfully know. But I'll admit it right here and now. I'm going full old guy here, so get off my lawn, by the way. Today's music ain't music. I said it. It ain't music. But it was so important to my generation. We grew up with what I think were the golden years of music. Great music. In the 80s alone, we had the king of pop, Michael Jackson, himself a proclaimed Jehovah's Witness. Imagine the head-dizzying stuff we went through with that. We had new wave, we had hair metal, we had people like Whitney Houston, all the music that young kids, artists that they love today, now copy or throw a dance track over. Yep, I said it, old guy, get off my lawn. You're just stealing our music. You're just stealing it, putting a dance track over it. In my opinion, we had the real music. And wouldn't you know it, Jesus and the guys in upstate New York had a lot to say to us about our music and our dancing. Music is a really interesting subject for my generation of J-Dub teens. It was the one thing I think, in hindsight, we completely ignored everything the society said back then. Yeah, there's that term, the society in itself. That was our term for my generation, for the governing body and the organization. But we ignored everything they said. We didn't listen to the old faceless men in New York. The sisters back in the day started sneaking into meetings with dark makeup, lace gloves, and more. You would really see this at the circuit assemblies and the summer district conventions where I'm from on the west coast of the U.S. It was great. Sisters sneaking in inspiration from Madonna back in the day. And look, as a guy, I was a sucker for the dark eye makeup. But even as we left the parking lots at the end of conventions or meetings, you would hear teenagers and that worldly music. And we would laugh at the service meeting parts about how to behave at the hotel pool at the convention. Don't play your music and make sure you're wearing a modest bathing suit. It was hilarious. It was the one thing that we went, yeah, okay, not going to happen. We gave up sports. I couldn't be homecoming queen. I am going to rock the ghetto blaster. And that's what we called the radios back then. Inappropriate probably by today's terms. And also, and probably the most important for my generation, Jehovah's Witness teenagers, and I actually saw this on a TikTok, a young person asking if this was true. I never laughed so hard. I loved it. We had dance parties. That was the biggest social event of the year for JW teens for it in my time frame. It was huge. Some brave parent thought maybe a dance party for these poor teenagers at their house. Yeah, that might be a good time. And look, as a guy, and this, it's all from my perspective, folks, this is where we would meet cute girls. This is where we'd meet sisters from other congregations, dance parties. And despite how worldly all the musicians were, we were out there putting on the moves. Oh yeah, we were doing all the dances. everything that was considered vulgar by the society's standards. And I'll tell you, looking back, it's some of my favorite memories from my time as a teenager. And you have to pick and choose when you grew up a Jehovah's Witness. I look back and how, how do I say this? How cool I was when I would dress up like Don Johnson from Miami Vice. Oh, yeah, picture it. I got photos. A white sport coat with the sleeves pulled up to the elbows, a t-shirt of Mickey Mouse or a pink tank top underneath, no socks, and when it wasn't a JW dance party, I had to put it all away. But we did it. We did it. We disobeyed all of it when it came to music and dancing. And incidentally, that extended for my generation. I know there are probably younger people listening going, yeah, let's turn this is boring. I get it. Just giving you a snapshot. But if it wasn't a dance party where we were dancing like everything we saw on MTV when we watched that and dressing just like the worldly people, oh yes. Probably the other greatest thing that happened on a weekly basis for teenagers of my generation was Sunday night roller skating. Oh, yeah, it was huge. You went to the meeting, you chatted it up, you talked about what you were going to wear, and I'll see you tonight at the roller skating rink. Not kidding about this. There were more marriages formed out of Sunday night roller skating than anywhere else I can recall in my time as a Jehovah's Witness. Holding that cute sister's hand, doing the hokey pokey, and then accidentally falling on top of her. It was awkward, but it was apparently all okay with Jesus, who was watching on, because it was the one thing our parents let us do. If it wasn't the dance party, it was roller skating, and it was a shot at meeting other kids your age. And look, it was great. I'm laughing. It was great. The lights, the music, just thinking about those carpeted walls that we would collide into, holding hands with sweaty palms with that sister from that other congregation. It was good times, and it was all that we had in the 1980s. It was the only way we could be social. But again, none of this, even the good times and the bad times, stopped Jesus guys in New York from telling us how to live. They knew the power of music on my generation. They could see the grip it had on us as teenagers. And look, I know my perspective. If you talk to someone from the 60s, it was the Beatles and Elvis. It's every generation. But for whatever reason, this was the big one for mine. Or maybe it was my peer group. And the governing body and the organization knew it. We had those dance parties and those roller skating parties because we weren't allowed to do anything else. Going back to the School and Jehovah's Witnesses brochure from 1983, page 24, this is what we were told, quote, "You may have noted that witness youths usually do not attend dances sponsored by the school, such as the junior and senior proms. Why? This is principally because of the poor environment that often exists in connection with school dances. Commonly, there is smoking, alcohol abuse, use of drugs, as well as scandalous sexual conduct. Thus, a person who attends these dances almost unavoidably is thrown together with unwholesome associates. So, in keeping with the admonition to pursue activities along with those who call upon the Lord out of a clean heart, it is the custom of Jehovah's Witnesses to stay clear of school dances," end quote. They apparently never heard us leaving the Kingdom Hall parking lot singing Darling Nikki from Prince's Purple Rain album. We'll leave that alone. I don't have time to tell you how absolutely absurd this all was. But as a confirmed hair metal guy, just a music guy in general, that saw RATT and Bon Jovi and Def Leppard and many more from the front row, I'm glad I put my baptism in jeopardy to attend Satan's concerts back in the 80s, and I did, because watching those guys now is painful. Don't go on TikTok. I was a living example of the 1980s favorite term from the guys in New York. Who remembers this one? Leading a double life. Oh, yes, he's a double lifer. They're leading a double life. You don't want to lead a double life. And let me tell you something. I was the poster child because I was leading a double life. And let me tell you something. This little episode inspired me to open a few boxes. There are pictures of this. And I can't tell you how fun it is to look back. Who remembers, by the way, Circus Magazine? Any other hair metal guys out there? Circus Magazine, man, that was epic. I was slightly older by the time this hit the publications. But the Awake of February 22nd, 1993, page 26 is a core memory for me because I was still barely out of my 20s, and I remembered the pain and the endless counsel about music from when I was a teen. The Awake of February 22nd, 1993, currently available on the JW Library, told us this, quote, "Take heavy metal music, a particularly noxious form of hard rock that is usually played at ear-splitting volume," end quote. I can confirm. And the worst part is I was still listening to it when this Awake landed and I was an older guy. Back to the quote, "Heavy metal bands typically sport names like Poison, Skid Row, Guns N' Roses, and Slayer. Time magazine said, the band names alone conjure up images of mayhem, torture, and death. The same can be said of the horrifying artwork that adorns the album covers and that often depicts satanic symbols. But what about the music itself? It features such titles as Flesh and Blood and Appetite for Destruction," end quote. And I'm here to tell you the reason I remember that reference and found it instantly was because I owned all of those albums and I had seen most of them in concert, oftentimes from the front row, because back in the day, kids, we waited out all night to buy tickets. It was an event, even as JW kids. And I saw all of those bands. And listen, I cracked up rereading this because as for the horrifying artwork on the album covers they mention, something I missed, by the way, albums and going to the record store was a full day adventure. God, you kids missed out. I'm just going to say this about those artwork, the album covers. I'm guessing these guys haven't seen their own Watchtower illustrations. I'm considering changing the name of this podcast to Welcome to the Jungle. You see, it's a play on paradise after all. What do you think? Let's vote. But while I want to have fun with the countless pages of counsel on music and dancing, their counsel on school clubs, school plays, and even college, oh yeah, it's all been said before. It's all in print. For anyone who wants to deny that we 80s kids were discouraged from me being in the chess club, playing volleyball, or even thinking about higher education, you're just deluding yourself. I want to, for a minute, briefly touch on the most uncomfortable teaching that almost none of us understood as teenagers in the 1980s. And because most of us didn't understand it, it was frankly most of our introduction to our first judicial meetings. I don't think it's a reach to say that this one really shaped our lives or had a deeper impact on a 1980s teenager future life, even in the organization. Everything from marriage in the future to privileges and more. It was all impacted by this one. Suddenly running into a classmate in the door-to-door ministry on Saturday morning wasn't the most embarrassing thing you had to face as a kid in the 80s. I still remember the first time I heard this teaching. And it was like, talk to me like I'm 5 because I don't understand this. I remember looking at the elders and going, wait, what? You might remember, if you were an 80s teenager, the doctrine I'm speaking of. It was one little Greek word that became a bumper sticker for my generation. Say it with me. Pornea. Oh, yeah. I'm sure that a few people said it. I'm going to bank on it. But when you say pornea, do you shudder a little bit? Is it a little uncomfortable? Even a little bit. Yeah. The grossly misapplied Greek word that would set off a chain reaction of shock, shame, and embarrassment that oftentimes in the 80s took place right in front of the rest of the congregation, especially if you were baptized, as most young Jehovah's Witnesses were. They get baptized young, folks. And I'm just going to bare my soul for a minute here. I believe I've done it in the past. The first time I heard the word pornea, I was sitting on the other side of a table in the B school of the Kingdom Hall, and it was being explained to me by 3 elders. I was like, what's that? What's pornea? They then went on to explain to me that those things I was doing with that certain cute sister weren't just, quote, fooling around, but they were considered fornication. What? Listen, straight talk. I still get that feeling in the pit of my stomach remembering this. If you're thinking we then thought, well, if that's the case, why don't we just really go all the way and do what we want to do? Well, I'm going to be honest with you, the thought crossed more than a few minds and people acted on it. It was at this point I suddenly learned that even that stuff we were doing alone without a chaperone that wouldn't make a baby, well, it was still considered fornication or pornea. And without dragging this down, I'll just say I dodged several bullets. I somehow was never disfellowshipped and had many private conversations with my fellow best guy J-Dub friends in the organization. None of us knew this. All of us would look at each other like, what the hell is pornea? I'm not going to turn this into a conversation on ancient Greek, nor what scholars actually believe the word means, but needless to say, it's the single biggest word I learned as a J-Dub teenager in the 80s. You see, as teenagers do, they mess around. I always thought, as did my other buddies, we could get to a certain point in a session with a sister, then hit the brakes. We really believed that. We believed we could take it right up to a certain point, and then we knew when to stop. Yeah, we weren't the brightest bunch. Teenage guys just aren't. But now, out of nowhere, I'm learning Greek and finding out I'm a habitual fornicator. Wait a minute, what? Uh-oh. The governing body at one point, and I invite you to take a look at the landmark watchtower of March 15th, 1983, page 30, they were actually trying to correlate oral and anal stuff inside a marriage between married people as being part of a sin, even though it wasn't pornea. That Greek word was reserved for us unmarried folks doing naughty things. And folks, if you think that this is weird and off the rails, they still believe this. 90+% of judicial meetings inside Jehovah's Witnesses involve unmarried people, including teenagers and grown adults, getting too touchy with one another. I could tell story after story from my 1980s JW peer group. All guys, by the way, of that time, but it wouldn't be appropriate. It wouldn't be appropriate to share the stories, but needless to say, in the 1980s, we were all doing it. Pornea. We went from don't do that to look, dude, everything's pornea. Do what you want. As soon as one person got in trouble, it was like wildfire. as we started comparing judicial meeting notes. Did you know about this pornea thing? And look, frankly, wait a minute. Okay, ladies, close your ears. Ladies, just plug your ears for a moment. It's hilarious to look back on the lengths teenage J-dub guys would go to not commit fornication, but get as close to that line as they could, only to learn in a judicial meeting it was all the same stuff anyway, and we were in trouble. It's incredible the stories I could tell, and I'm sure I'm not alone. I'm going to share one absurd story to emphasize how stupid we were and how pornea impacted our lives. Here it comes. I was very, very close. One of my closest friends, I should say, was a buddy, and he was in a relationship with a sister for many years since they were young. They had, for much of their courtship, no chaperone present, you might imagine, they were taking showers together, but not touching because fornication and stuff. Pornea. That's how absurd this got. We'll take it all the way up to a line, and then we'll hit the brakes, including standing in a shower together, just staring. Yeah, that eventually doesn't work anymore, by the way. And there are many more similar stories involving touching and wear, but let's just stop there. The whole pornea thing gained traction in the early 70s, I believe. That's my take on it. But by the 1980s, the elders had carte blanche to go after the horny teenagers for all things fornication, and let me tell you, it was game on. And incidentally, it's worth mentioning that the whole pornea thing is directly tied to elders who committed sins in their distant past but never confessed to it. But they can go on serving as elders. Yeah, this is in the Elder Handbook. And by the way, this guy was guilty of it. Why? Because there was no pornea when they were teenagers messing around. So they just hid it. They had no clue that time you were making out and your hands strayed too far was actually considered fornication. And so the New York governing body had to come up with something that lives in the New Shepherd's Handbook to this day, that if a guy did these naughty things in the past and was an elder today, he can just forget about it and keep being an elder. By the way, if you'd like a reference for the one that impacted my life, the October 1972 question box, go look it up. And I've got a whole episode on this in the past about never, ever confessing to the elders. I strongly recommend that for anyone who's a Jehovah's Witness today, ever. But you simply cannot discuss growing up a Jehovah's Witness in the 1980s without a mention of the Greek word they just decided to define their way. By the way, I know this from my own experience, because I was then an elder at 27. This brilliant 1980s teaching had the reverse effect, folks. It didn't exactly scare people. Yep, once two people started touching certain things, they then knew they were fornicating. So off came any inhibition, and they just went for it. Full-blown getting busy. Why bother? We're already in trouble. Let's enjoy this in the moment. That is exactly how the pornea teaching trickled down to teenagers. Not just teenagers, but mostly. And the truth is, I have no idea why this dynamic, or what this dynamic is like today for teenagers inside Jehovah's Witnesses. But the pornea thing was big, big stuff in the 80s. And we brothers had some very crude things we would say to each other when we saw one of us sneaking off with a cute sister. It was typical teenage stuff. It was juvenile. It was crude teenage boy stuff. I won't share any. But our knowledge of pornea changed everything. Everything. Growing up a Jehovah's Witness in the 1980s was stifling in ways we never realized until we were older. As just one example, the issue of higher education in college. Despite what you see Jehovah's Witness apologists saying in 2025 with the governing body's new light, college was condemned for my generation. Condemned. It's undeniable. It's a fact. The governing body as a unit of all controlling men were just over 10 years old in the 80s, and we didn't even know who they were. The governing body as we know it today wasn't formed until 1971, so they were 9 or 10 years old when we got them. Most of us led satanic double lives, only to become the next generation of congregation elders, dealing with the teenagers of the 90s and the 2000s. No more big hair, no more clove cigarettes, or getting hammered and showing up to the Saturday morning book study still buzzed. We did it all the time. Hell, there's no more book study at all. There's not even big book bags anymore. There's no more reasoning books or burning our Motley Crue albums because someone heard a bump in the night and thought that the demons came over to party with us as we sang Shout at the Devil. Soon, all the cultural suffocation that marked our generation would fade away. We were adults now, and you no longer needed food tickets to get that sloppy roast beef sandwich at the convention. Kids today don't stay in college dorms at conventions and sneak out in the middle of the night to meet your crush from another congregation. They just text them or they send them a Snapchat. And while I will be fond of all of this for the rest of my life, I don't have much of a choice. I would be remiss to mention that almost all of those teenagers I grew up with in the 80s, they got married really, really young. Mine was the day after my 20th birthday. Oh, and almost all of them, if not all that come to my mind, they got divorced. Many left the organization. Some came forward to share the horrific things they were victims of during that time of their life from other baptized adult Jehovah's Witnesses they trusted, even elders. Some lost their family back then, over 40 years ago, and have never seen or spoke to them again since the 80s. It wasn't supposed to be how stories ended in the world that we grew up in. You see, we were supposed to be the generation that walked right into paradise. We were taught that we would never get old. We were never going to get sick like our parents did. We didn't even need good jobs. We didn't need an education. We certainly didn't need to think about retirement. What's that? But more than anything, and a subject unto itself, we never thought about death. We weren't going to experience it. Our baby brains had grown up believing we would never die. We had no reason to worry about it. And it wasn't until I was an older man that it hit me, and it hit me hard. This was the same exact story for every generation of every kid that grew up a Jehovah's Witness. I just happened to be born as the 20th century was ending. So I truly did have an outlook that we were very special. We weren't. So why share any of this? Why go down memory lane? Aside from the fun and remembering great things, I really, really want younger generation of Jehovah's Witnesses to realize what we endured so that my generation won't be forgotten. I honestly don't know how family and old friends that have stayed loyal to this organization are dealing with the reality of what they're watching inside the organization today. But I'll tell you, sunk cost fallacy is a real thing. And so for that reason, I share it for today's young people inside Jehovah's Witnesses. I know it seems crazy to think this, but soon, you young ones, you're going to be us. Minus the cheese danishes. Very special. I'd like to leave you with one of the wisest quotes I've ever heard in my entire life. It comes to us from someone that I hold in very high regard. One of the wisest guys I've ever known. And it's no small coincidence that he's mostly from the 80s. He said this, quote, "Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it." End quote. Not a member of the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. Not a 500-year-old ark builder with low testosterone. Nope. Just really, really good advice from Ferris Bueller, a young guy that grew up in the 1980s. I want to thank you for joining me this week. Wherever you may be, I'm off to listen to Purple Rain. Be well.